meetings when I'm not here.
All righty. So I'll call to order this work session, and we will be starting with our Home Energy Score program. This is a discussion to be led by our Public Works Director, Peter Pasquale, and our Sustainability Coordinator, Ellie Rogers.
It's a long name there.
I know, I always want to go with Director. Every single time I have to catch myself.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I'm Natalie Rogers, Climate Action Sustainability Coordinator. And we just wanted to bring to you guys our Home Energy Score program, once again, that we're currently working on in alignment with our Climate Action Plan. And just bringing back some questions and addressing some questions that we had previously on designing the framework of the program. And so just to kind of remind us all why we're here talking about this, so residential energy efficiency is critical for us to meet our climate action plan goals and allowing us to shift towards more renewable energy. Renewable energy is fickle in that it comes on at different times and is available during the day at different times. And so energy efficiency is the easiest way for us to meet our renewable energy goals and allow us to actually decarbonize our grid mix. In addition, energy efficiency really helps the people who need it the most, right? People who don't have a lot of income to spend on high utility bills. Energy efficiency helps decrease those costs. The Home Energy Score program that we're using for our residential energy scoring program is from the U.S. Department of Energy. The methodology is simple, it's replicable, affordable, and it's established across multiple communities across the United States. It only scores assets in the home. So those are features in the home like your furnace, your windows, things that stay with the home when the residents leave it. It doesn't look at operational behavior. It doesn't look at when you turn on your thermostat or when you don't turn on your thermostat or when you open a window. And that way it gives you a really good snapshot on how that home will perform with anyone in that building.
So I would add with that too, so like Nest thermometers and programmable thermometers that you might have in your home, that doesn't take into account those because that's sort of still a behavior-driven piece. Mm-hmm.
And so a home energy score program is essentially at time of listing of the home for sale. That is when a home energy scorecard would be needed. A home energy score report provides that scorecard, which is that 2-pager quick informational handout, but then also a lot more information that the homeowners can access contained on the Green Building Registry, which is a public database. As the framework exists now for that program, we're modeling after Portland's framework. Portland's framework provided a list of exemptions for situations of financial distress and where ownership of the home is kind of ambiguous because a lot of times the title moves between the financial institution and the homeowner, and in those sales circumstances, it's not quite clear who's that point of contact. We've had previous discussions at our last study session that removing foreclosures as an exemption was one thing that the council kind of agreed on, and we think that that will be easily done by staff and in our compliance process. And then finally, I did want to mention that we are still looking at low-income assistance, providing assistance for individuals who qualify for it to get a free home energy score performed. And we'd be working through a community energy project, which is already a nonprofit that works in our region to provide weatherization and energy efficiency improvements for low-income marginalized community members. And the framework for our low-income assistance would kind of mimic our utility assistance program as it exists right now. Essentially, if you qualify for utility assistance, you would qualify for a free home energy score. And that allows us to streamline paperwork. And
would that be the only factor that's utilized? I mean, I know a lot of people that are right above that having another couple of $100 added on to their opportunity to sell their home and make some kind of a benefit would be really
so the way Portland works, if I remember right, so that's kind of those pre-foreclosure exemptions that exist. If they can prove that they're selling a home below cost value,
well, it may not be somebody that's selling a home because of foreclosure or whatever, but say an elderly person who can't live in their home anymore, they need to be somewhere else, but they live on Social Security, for instance, and, you know, they don't have a job, they've got the most fixed income in the United States, you know.
So
On the
if
other
they-
hand, they're going to, depending on their circumstances, they may be about to make thousands and thousands of dollars.
They
So how do
may
we get into
or may
judging
not.
those?
Right. Good
You know,
point,
they
absolutely.
could be coming into a windfall, a house they inherited, a house, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. So, I mean,
And we can look
I
at.
think our
But maybe
Our
there may
line
be
is
other
probably a
factors.
good-
Yeah, but there just may be other factors that we could realistically and logistically look at other than just who receives, you know, that
Right.
benefit right now.
The pathway, yeah, you're right. And the pathway we chose, working through our utility assistance program, that was in conversations with our finance department to make sure confidential information is going through a secure process within the city to qualify for that. In discussions with Community Energy Project, there are other options we can look into. Sometimes, like Portland offers essentially, you sign a piece of paper saying that I qualify for this and take it at word value, you know? And Community Energy Project says that they can also income qualify folks. I don't know if that benchmark, though, changes. Usually it's something like below 60% median value for the area of income. So I don't know if that will shift, at least that qualifying benchmark for assistance, but that is something that we can talk about, and in terms of it maybe increasing that budget for assistance to make sure that we can provide more help to community
all
members.
right. Thank you.
Okay, so we had our study session on the 13th, and the two kind of remaining questions that came out of it were trees and exterior home features, having a disclosure statement on the scorecards that address the benefits of those property components to energy efficiency, and then also real estate licensees as the regulated party for a home energy score program.
There was also, it wasn't included, the disclosure would also discuss that not all assets, that there were other factors that would not necessarily be captured.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I can add, I'll show you some example language and I can modify it with that
Okay.
information. Thank you. So for the first one, for disclosure statements, so I approved or received approval from Oregon Department of Energy that we can include a disclosure statement on our scorecards. We will share that language with a home energy source stakeholder group that is of regional partners in the area in the state of Oregon who are looking into home energy score programs or involved in home energy score decision making. That disclosure appears in that yellow box down below, and that's where we can modify our own language. I kind of just drafted up some example language of trees, tall vegetation, and exterior building features, as well as additional home assets not included in score methodology, can increase energy efficiency of a home by shading building walls and serving as windbreaks. For more information, visit. And then we would link probably additional resources. Maybe, Wilda, to your point, there are also Energy Trust of Oregon, Community Energy Project do have additional resources that people could probably qualify for and get incentives for home improvements and weatherization, even if you're not a qualified low-income community member, that we could link all of this information to make sure people have the best resources.
Okay.
So I'll continue discussions with Oregon Department of Energy to really draft that language and make sure that it fits essentially all of the needs that we've discussed previously.
Yeah, I think my main point was that that the score may not accurately reflect the energy savings of this home, because of the issue that we've talked about, which is that, no one's actually inspecting whether or not someone has insulated their attic. No one's inspecting that. So the insulation might be there, which means that score is wrong. And so I think, a very short sentence getting at that would satisfy my concern.
Okay, great.
And to kind of riff off of Wilda's concern, when was the last time we sort of sanity checked our threshold for people getting a break on?
Does it get revisited with each rate
CUAB.
setting every year.
With each rate increase, is it?
Is it actually, do we sit down and look at it and think about, okay, cost of living has done this?
Well, no, but as the percentage
Percentage.
of AMI or whatever it is.
It's based off of, it was in line with the sort of the information discussed with the affordable housing, that those different low-income levels based off of income and number of people that live in the homes that might be in the residence. So I think that's updated pretty frequently, at least on an annual basis.
I know we looked at this when Alma was here, and we were working on the MHAS. So that's the last time that I know somebody from the perspective of us for a housing-specific purpose looked at it, because we were trying to make sure that we were actually hitting those programs effectively. So it's probably been 2 years since I can guarantee somebody with a housing perspective sat down and looked at it. But I would have to defer to Bonnie on whether or not we do it on an annual basis through the.
So would people apply for that themselves? I mean, we don't know that information. So for instance, if you're one person and you have X income, but then somebody else begins to live with you and now two, or you have a child that you didn't have before, or something like that, or a child moves back home. Yeah.
So the question would probably be, how often would you have to submit paperwork in order to stay within the program? So I don't know that.
Or how you would apply in the first place, how you would even know to apply.
We actually have that is something we worked with our partners on. So we've been having conversations, and that's why I knew it was tied to the MHAS. I've personally talked to several churches in the region who help individuals come in and apply for that. They asked a way that they could help individuals who are struggling. I said, it's paperwork. It's always helpful for you to be a guide through paperwork for anybody. You and I have talked in the past about how hard some of that paperwork is.
Oh, it's horrible.
Ours is not, but it doesn't mean that it can't be difficult for an individual when they're stressed and when they have a lot going on in their life. And so she wanted to make sure that the paperwork would be a process that someone could go through easily. And the churches, at least the churches I spoke to, there were 2 churches who were willing to help and to be a reference for that program.
So I have just a curiosity question that I just happened to think of as we're having this discussion. So throughout Milwaukee, we know that we have a number of low-income homes, of Section 8 housing and other affordable homes. And if hypothetically, if I were a Section 8 person, had a Section 8 voucher, do I pay my own utilities? And so therefore, I need to find out about.
Sorry, I just backed that. That's not a question that I can answer.
Well, I think that,
Yeah.
Does it? Okay, I just wonder, I'm just curious, yeah. I don't know how that system works.
I can have Christina look at it and make sure that we look at it again this year, just to sort of re-up that process. The issue that you noted, Counselor, about having someone move into the house. So there are a lot of programs that when you sign up for the utility program, you could easily refer to that would give you a sense of whether or not you're going to qualify within the AMI. If you qualify for X, you also qualify for this. So if the terminology I think we use is if you have a child who qualifies for free and reduced lunch, you would qualify for the program. Just trying to make it easy for people to get a really quick sense of, do I qualify in this situation? And so we can revisit that and just make sure that it's really accessible for more people. If you think of places where you'd like us to refer that program, we're always happy to. But it's in the housing website. It's also something that we talk to any nonprofit or group that's looking to support families in need.
Okay.
And we average, I think, about 180 residences that take advantage of the low-income assistance for their utility bills.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have discussed also, there's opportunity to put in like bill inserts, bill stuffers for the advertising for home energy score assistance qualification. So we would make sure to have additional outreach about the program and assistance.
So that just struck me, 180, you said we average. What's our percentage of households that are paying more than 50% of their income for housing?
24.
That's way more than 180
we're going to come back to you. We have some amazing staff people.
And worms.
Exactly. No, I mean, I think these are all really important questions. They really are better suited for having a discussion with Christina when she does her next update. So Layla's off trying to find her right now. We'll try and get you more information about the program, but I know that when we looked into this last year or 2 years ago, we actually did a stuffer at the time, I believe. Do you remember that, Peter? I think we went in and we did a stuffer to all ratepayers again, just to say, hey, do you know that you would qualify for this program? So we have been encouraging people to look into this for themselves when appropriate.
Yeah.
Some people just don't apply. And you don't always know the situation of the individual who's living in the house.
Right. I
And
mean,
so it's
how
really
would
hard
we?
for us to
Yeah.
judge whether or not, without having you bring the information to us. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And that 180 number that I mentioned, that came from doing our utility rate study, so looking at who was in that rate classification.
Right. Yeah, it's just, somebody's in that situation and they're living that close to the bone, the bandwidth to sort of understand, oh, wow, there's this program that I could be saving, whatever, $30 a month or $50 a month on my utilities. They just don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
have that bandwidth.
And I mean, discussing with Community Energy Project, that was one thing that they did mention from Portland's program, is that they do wish that there were an increase in outreach regarding the availability of the program. So that is one note that I took from those discussions. I want to make sure we do better. Okay, and so that disclosure statement, so I mean, I even drafted really quickly something about additional home renovations and changes to improve energy efficiency of the building may not have been disclosed to the assessor and may not be reflected in the home energy score, something like that. Great. So real estate licensees as a regulated party. So when we started this conversation, we were talking primarily to Portland, who has that established program, Oregon Department of Energy, and Earth Advantage. And we highlighted in discussions with council the possibilities and potential advantages of having real estate licensees as a regulated party. They're already trained professionals with industry experience. They're often mediators between an already complicated process of sellers and buyers. There's a potential for increased program compliance and reduced impact on homeowners. But so when we first started talking to Portland, I've been engaging in conversations with Portland's Home Energy Score program manager. She was not present for policy development, so she couldn't really tell me what Portland's process was with considering the disadvantage and the legal concerns about the statutes that have been brought up both by PMAR as well as others. And so and additional information came in from Portland Metropolitan Association Realtors, who Daryl's actually here today, of continued statutes that also are prohibitive of regulating realtors, real estate licensees. And so the disadvantages of having real estate licensees as a regulated party, we do see a potential disadvantage in program framework misalignment with Portland's, no known case studies of a similar framework, but that might be because Portland deemed actually that Oregon statute prohibits having real estate licensees
You don't
as a
have any
regulated
information
party.
that that's true.
Sorry?
Did anyone from Portland tell you that they
Yes,
deemed-
yeah, so I reached out to,
No, that they deemed it legally
yes, so.
not possible?
I reached out to Portland,
Okay.
and Portland, Wendy from Portland got a hold of Kyle Diesner, who was their policy developer, and he said, he sent me an email that pretty much said that the statute prohibits regulating real estate licensees, and the program can only exist by regulating sellers.
Of course.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know that it's regulating
I'm reading that, and I don't
licensees.
know that what we're proposing would be regulating the licensees. It would be a condition on
Listing.
the listings.
But wouldn't
it's
that be a
not. We're not.
regulation if
We're
it's a
not
condition?
designating who can
Right.
who can list or who cannot list. We're just putting a condition on listing. We're not saying who's a licensed real estate. We're not trying to say who's a licensed real estate person. We're saying these are the conditions
Right,
to
but you're
list a
saying
home in Oregon.
If you want to sell this home in Milwaukee, you must do XXX.
But we're saying that
And
anyway.
that, to me, seems like a regulation.
But we're saying that anyway. That is what we're doing. We're saying
Well, we're
that if you
saying
don't want to be fined.
the homeowner or somebody has to do it.
Right, but it's,
With that language, any fee for
Which to me,
licensing or regulation
not
of
convinced that's the right route
individuals,
anyhow.
we're not licensing or regulating individuals, we're licensing or regulating listings. I think, yeah, I don't think that's,
I appreciate that we actually have a little bit more to chew on, because in the report, all I saw was the same one that we discussed last time, which, I read the statute, and it has, it doesn't actually, it talks about compensate, sharing
yeah.
of commissions, so to me, that wasn't, actually, it didn't seem relevant. So I would like to have more time to review these statutes.
Great.
So that's how I'm feeling about, this might be some language that's pulled out of one of them, but I haven't had a chance to read any of the other ones. And I'm not sure that, Justin, you have either. If you're just now seeing these.
No, I've spent plenty of time looking at Chapter 696, and it's a pretty thorough chapter. I might quibble with who's actually being regulated, because if the HES, if the score isn't maintained, who actually receives the citation in that case? Does the homeowner receive the citation? Or
What do you mean if it isn't
Doesn't have to be
maintained? You mean if it
maintained,
isn't kept up, you have to do it more than once?
You only have to do it once at the time of listing.
Right, but if it's not done, we're looking at compliance.
but we're not threatening their licensure.
But you're regulating the way in which they can do business here in the, there's some language that's missing there, actually. The statute says, after this language, it says, nothing in this section shall limit the authority of a city, county, or town to levy and collect a general and non-discriminatory license fee upon which all businesses in the city, county, or town, or to levy a tax based upon the business conducted by any licensee. So they're essentially saying the only thing that you can do is have them get a business license.
Get a business license, right?
Well,
Tax.
Yeah.
nothing,
Well-
saying nothing shall limit this doesn't say this is all you can do. It says nothing here limits this, but it doesn't mean this
Well,
is the only thing you can do.
these
This is
statutes-
just something that was called out at the
These
time.
statutes have been painstakingly drafted and lobbied. I think if you try to regulate, based on my reading of these statutes and the entire framework that regulates the real estate profession, my belief is if you name the real estate licensee as a regulated party, you will get challenged.
Well,
And that would delay implementation of the program.
but, very often this is how government keeps doing the weak thing, is because we fear a court case that we could very well win, too, which would then set a precedent for the state, which would then cause this to happen more often and be more effective.
Perhaps.
Did you look at
Or a new
court
statute would
cases?
get written.
Has this been challenged?
Well, how many other cities are even doing home energy scores?
Well, I mean, not this
Especially in our
specific thing,
area.
but nobody's ever imposed a,
I didn't
Anything?
see any in the
Okay.
annotation.
Yeah.
okay.
I have a problem with the basic premise of you have to have this done if you plan to sell your home, and yet you don't, and you get a fine, or you're fined, or whatever, if you don't, and yet, at the same time, once you have it done, there's nothing to say that you have to do anything about any of that, which somehow, in some ways, seems, so let's say you need double pane windows, so somebody that's a more affluent family could go ahead and put those double pane windows in and have that done. Someone who is on a lesser income and maybe, needs to try to sell their house quicker wouldn't be able to do that. So, their opportunity is diminished just by having this piece of paper that says one thing or the other. But the fact that you can be fined for not doing it, but you don't have to follow through with it, is really unusual for me, and I'm really conflicted about that.
Well,
I'm not saying,
I'm not sure I understand the concern.
I do, and basically the reasoning is that this sends a market signal, right? This is your Joe home buyer, right? And you're going out there and you're going, okay, I've got 3 houses I like. They're all blue. They all have 3 trees. They all are
I get-
2
yeah.
blocks away from our school. Which one do I like the best? What are some other factors? And if one of the factors is this one's going to be a far more efficient house, I'm going to buy that house, which then is going to send a market signal that, A, builders need to build their houses better, but also it's going to send a market signal to people who can afford to
And the
upgrade
people
their
who-
houses. They will upgrade their houses, and then we get more energy efficiency out of more houses.
I get wanting to do all that. It just seems strange that we're looking at putting in place something that if I determine, if I become ill and I need to move and I can't live in my house any longer, that I've got to get this energy score, or I'm going to get fined if I don't have it and put my house up for sale, but I could get it, and it might say you need to do X, Y, and Z, but I can't afford to do any of that, so I'm not going to do it. So the house next to me gets the same thing I get, but they've got the money to be able to do that.
This is not intended to incentivize the homeowner to make the improvements.
I know, it's
Well,
to,
it might.
but it's,
It
yeah, I
might.
would think that it is. Why would we do it otherwise?
It's-
I mean, I can tell somebody everything
So-
I've put into my house, on my double pane windows, my insulation, I can tell them how much my utility bills are every
Of
month
course,
exactly.
because you've been a
No
great
matter what
steward
they
of your
wanna
house.
know.
Yeah.
But, so
Yeah.
for example, when I sold my house, I knew that if I painted the house and if I
Right, you'd get it better.
refinished the floors and I did all these other things, I
Right.
would get a better price for my house.
Of course.
I couldn't afford to do that. So I sold my house as is.
As is.
So I got the price I got. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But the point of the home energy score is kind of like when you go to a car dealer and you look at the miles per gallon on the windows. You know,
I can relate
You
it.
can go to the
Yes.
SUV that gets 5 miles per gallon, or you can go to the, you know, the
Tesla that gets-
Tesla, or you
Buy
can go
an
to
electric car that
Right,
gets,
But even setting aside electric cars and everything else, just
Yeah,
in
I
a
know.
regular gas-powered car, there's a lot of different cars on the lot that have a lot of different miles per gallon ratings, and that's what this home energy score
Yes.
is. It's information to the buyer about what you're buying. It's a buyer disclosure. It may lead people to upgrade their house before they sell, but plenty of people it won't. I think I told the story the first time we discussed this, that I had a friend with a historic home over in Northeast Portland. She got a 0 energy score, or 1. They told her all these things about replacing her historic windows. She's like, I'm not replacing the historic wavy glass in these windows. And she got 4 offers the first day the house
Sure.
went on the market.
Depends
So,
on the
I mean,
house.
there's
Yeah.
it depends on the house, it depends on the buyer. There are buyers for everything, I think, in this
Yeah.
market.
Well, I remain concerned that it puts fear into people that don't have the same wherewithal that other people have.
Well, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's also people buying houses. And I think that they have a right to as much information as they can have about the house, because they are taking on
Like I said, I can
a
tell them
new.
all mine.
You can. A lot of people can't. A lot of people who are selling their houses have not been as responsible as you, or they won't.
Yeah.
Or they're
And can you
disingenuous.
prove them, even if you can tell?
Right.
Absolutely.
So this gives a baseline for people who are buying houses, who are entering into a 30-plus year contract with a bank. This gives them some ballpark assurance that they have an understanding of what their utility costs are going to be for the next decades to come, and that is a big deal. And I don't think that, I don't want to privilege the home seller over the home buyer in that circumstance, especially in Milwaukee, where we do have families who are trying to be first-time home buyers, and they deserve just as much information as the people in Portland who are trying to buy. And we're getting more and more of them coming from Portland because they can't afford to live in Portland. If you've got people who are moving to Milwaukee because they can afford to live here but not afford to live in Portland, that means they're closer to the bone than the people we're talking about in Portland. Don't we have a responsibility to support them in making as responsible a financial decision going forward as we possibly can?
I just don't want anybody to be disadvantaged.
I know. I don't either.
And there's enough disadvantagement in the whole area already.
Yeah.
So,
So, to that nature, I do also want to say, in addition, the home energy score does provide a rough estimate of utility costs, which, and the value of the scorecard is that you don't have to invest in the home before you get that information. You don't have to spend the time to go meet the homeowner. And I'm impressed at how much you know about your house, because I know like nothing
I've
about my
never
house.
bought a house that I didn't already get that information from the people who live there.
Well, and I think a lot of people, it's energy efficiency is hard to translate. A lot of people don't know the differences between insulation values and what a triple pane window does for you versus a single pane window. And I think the value of this program is that it provides that consumer protection for knowing what you're getting yourself into. It helps us meet our energy efficiency and renewable energy goals as a community. It's in our climate action plan as a strategy for us to take moving forward. And I think there are going to be kinks that we need to work out. And I think we have a nimble and flexible team here, and we have the opportunity to actually create pathways and make it more attainable for people who are maybe already in a difficult situation. But, that's one value of Milwaukee, is that I think our staff works really closely with our community members, and we can actually extend those services to them where Portland may not be able to. So moving forward, it sounds like you still want us to consider or continue looking into having real estate licensees as a regulated party.
Yep.
I guess
I don't have enough information to not consider this question.
And I'll make sure I share that
Yeah.
information with you.
I would like some time to also look at these statutes and look for case law, but it sounds like Justin's done some of that. I guess my gut feeling is I wouldn't want us to be out there as the only one putting it on them. What I'd rather do than go out there and be the only one to put it on real estate licensures is let's all write a letter to every city that's doing it. Because at first I thought, Natalie can take it to this state board and talk it up, like, this is what my council wants to do, what do you think? Kind of plant the seed, but I think, the people who are going to that state board are not the decision makers, and so let's write Beaverton City Council, let's write the state, Portland, let's write the Corvallis, whoever else, and this state board, the state energy department, let's write a letter and just plaster them all and try and get them thinking about that we think it's a more, it'll be a more productive, it'll be, it'll happen faster,
Do they have
Compliance.
programs in place already? Are all those other cities doing home energy scores?
Those are all cities
Portland's done it, and Portland hasn't put the onus on the real estate agents, and so
From our discussions with a lot of communities that have climate action goals, there is interest in a residential energy scoring program. And just from informal discussions, a lot of them will be mimicking Portland's program framework, simply because it's well vetted, it's established, it's familiar.
Right.
And so we've had discussions with communities, a lot of communities doing it, a lot of communities with residential energy scoring programs that differ from Portland's. They either have their own municipal electric, or it's framed in a different way at time of closing, which are actually, like Berkeley, California is already seeing challenges with that at time of closing. It's not serving their needs like they thought. Portland's framework.
Explain that.
So requiring a home energy scorecard, a residential energy scoring report at time of closing doesn't provide them the opportunities
What's
of
the
like.
point then?
Exactly, yeah.
far down the road.
Yeah.
People are already,
So we can continue to look into possibilities of changing the regulated party. One caution I would have is it would delay our start of a program. And, every second counts in a lot of situations dealing with climate action. But we'll continue to make sure we have the best information to provide you guys. And I apologize for not providing that statute ahead of time. I actually just found out about it a few days ago. And so I wanted to make sure we gave it to you today rather than waiting. But
I would like to just add too, with Portland being the biggest market in the region, the realtors understand that program now, or are gaining a larger understanding of it, and having a program that's different than Portland's perhaps provides a disincentive for some realtors to do business in the community. It may not be a lot, but it certainly is it may be a disincentive where some realtors may not want to work in the community.
Well, I think Lisa's right that the big play is to convince as many other cities to consider this. I mean, what we could go back to Portland and say is, okay, this was your early shot at it. This was your best idea, and how well is it working out?
Well, and in fact, your staff report indicated that they're looking to reduce the 90, they're looking to make some tweaks to this program because they're looking to reduce the 90 days. And so it might be very timely to reach out to the Portland City Council.
Talking about.
Yeah.
And I think, and those, they're seeing increased compliance now that the first fees started rolling out with them. They are looking into shrinking that 90-day window just because the market is quicker than that. And that's actually, and I did want to say that we will be adjusting it to a 30 days for our program framework, just because I think that that is a better model for what our regional market actually for selling a home would be. And I just want to be aware of time.
Well, and I think the code also would say that if, let's say, your house sold in 3 days and we determined that you had not done this, you can still get the fine.
Yes, and so Portland, they had challenges with tracking down that information because once somebody moves, they don't have that address tied to the homeowner anymore. But they're finding that there may be additional pathways to still send those fines.
Hence the idea of having it with the realtor instead of the homeowner.
Well, I think from Portland, that information I got is their own city attorneys said that it would not be legal. And so I think I asked them that question that you proposed to me of do you think that this would increase compliance and efficacy? And they didn't really think about it because they didn't think it was an option. And then I do just want to, and I'm not going to go over this because it's way too much time, but just essentially that our code compliance coordinator and I will be working really closely on the compliance process, and that the 30-day window is shorter than the 90 days as originally proposed, and that is to potentially increase compliance and actually, especially because 10% compliance checks, which is what I'll be doing, is fairly a small amount of homes, 6 to 12 homes in Milwaukee that I'll be checking. And so because of that, the shorter time window is easy to maintain with my own workload. Though discussions with our code compliance coordinator, he is concerned that his own workload will be getting, is continually piling up. Therefore, I'm actually taking over some of the notices of violation responsibilities for this program if it were to be adopted. And Portland has willingly shared those materials with me. So,
Is there any concern about the random enforcement approach?
as in, like,
would that not be a challenge?
oh, so to have a randomized sample?
That we're not enforcing this, we're not trying to, we're saying this is going to be a random.
Yeah. So Portland actually did a compliance, they evaluated their compliance process, and they actually, across low income versus higher sale houses, they did see an equal distribution of their compliance process, which is what we'll be following. Essentially, they use a random number generator with existing home advertisement platforms like Zillow and Redfin, and using that random number generator, choose home online advertisements to check.
In that, I said this before, and I'm going to say it again, in that giant stack of papers you have to sign every time you buy a bloody house, could very easily be yet another piece of paper that says, yes, there was a home energy score for this house, or no, there wasn't. And then there you go. That goes to the title company, and that gets reported, and they get fined.
At the time of closing?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So then you know. So that right now we're counting on the random sampling of,
Yeah.
right, instead
The
of
hard-
that.
Yeah.
If they know bloody good and well that whether we do this with the realtors or whether we do this with the homeowners, if they know that at the end a report's going to be kicked out by the title company that says, here's the 30 houses that didn't comply, or here's the 200 houses that didn't comply last month.
Yeah, and so I looked
The forwarding
into,
address actually of the owner, because they will have that as well.
so I haven't looked into receiving contact information from title companies or any of that. I have done preliminary searches into how one would even start start up conversations with title companies on having like an additional information at the end. The hard part is that there is, from my understanding, and I'm sure Daryl will know a lot more, there's not really an overarching regulating body of a lot of title companies, and they can be for all over the United States, because if you're buying a house in Iowa, you could move to Iowa and sign stuff there. And so I would have to look into that process on how we would actually influence that signing process for a title company. I don't quite know.
So, for example, in Oregon, if there's a oil furnace now, you have to have it tested to see if it's leaking.
Right.
That's probably not the case in Louisiana or in anywhere else. So I have to assume there are local regulations that somebody, and in that case it's DEQ, is being informed, yes, they did the test and their tank is not leaking.
Right. I just haven't gone down the pathway through DEQ to find who I would contact to then contact a title company to then inquire about the process for how we would get that started. That's something I can continue to look into.
I mean, my guess is that that's a huge kettle of fish to get into. I mean, because that is one thing if it's on a statewide basis. It's another thing if you're a town of 20,000 and you're asking them to change the way they process, and you're asking multiple title companies to change the way they process closures. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I conceptually, I like it, but I think that's a huge...
So plan B, we go to Karen and we say, you need a state law that says all homes must have a home energy score and it has to be proven at title.
Well, let's do that.
I honestly think that working on changing the statute is probably a better route than many of the things we've been discussing here. I think this is an important enough action on behalf of our climate that it deserves state attention. I have concerns about, we've got 18% of our carbon footprint tied up in things related to what we're discussing today. That said, I don't want this to become 18% of Natalie's time.
No.
So I would like to be careful and respectful of how much time we ask her to put into getting this as good as we possibly can get it.
I mean, really what we've done is, because of trying to respect the time and utilize our resources efficiently, we've tried to model our program off of Portland, something that's true to, they've already set it up. Certainly there are some issues with that they're working on in terms of compliance. Part of that issue was they didn't start finding people for 18 months. So, we're suggesting that, we follow that same model that Portland has, because it allows us to do more with less.
But start finding sooner.
But start finding. Yeah. But start the compliance process.
The warnings and
sooner.
And even in here, you can see there's additional outreach, informal outreach to regulated party of approximately 15 days. So the goal is not to fine anyone, right? We don't want to implement a fine. We would rather rely on outreach and education. And really, in the scope of selling a home, that $150, a lot of times it's more of the time burden that people have perceived in getting an assessor out in their house, which can be relieved with the amount of assessors that we actually have fighting for business in the Portland metro area. But and I think, to Peter's point, the similarity between Portland's program and Milwaukee's program, and a higher similarity is easier for both the real estate licensees as well as the home sellers and the home buyers, in my opinion. But, I think that we can continue to pursue these other options of changing statutes or seeing if we can work with other communities to change the overall process. I just have personal concerns that it's going to slow program adoption and implementation. And there's other fish we want to catch, and I think that this is an opportunity where somebody has a tried and true program, and we can scale it down to our community size. Of course, there's going to be challenges. Of course, there's going to be things that we'll have to fix over time, but we can always, reintroduce this again. We can always come back to it and modify it for its betterment.
Well, so we could do both. We could pass it the way Portland's got it now, and then reach out to Karen to see about turning it into a statewide program. That way we're getting whatever amount of compliance we're getting now, and then...
And we can reach out to Portland about changing, you know, yeah.
About the regulated party?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Portland has been very open into working with us. They're actually very excited to have other communities, and I think we're at the front of a wave of other communities adopting a similar program. And so I think they know, actually talking to their program manager, this is her exciting part of her job, she says, is working with other communities. So
Didn't we learn at one of the very first meetings that we had about this that most of the real estate agents are paying for this themselves?
What?
there has been anecdotal cases of, yes, that they are paying for that, but I think it's definitely not a requirement, and I don't know much more about that. Okay, so I guess the direction that we will take moving forward is continue potential discussions with other communities that are interested in starting home energy score programs on their thoughts of changing regulated party, but maybe bringing this back to you as an as-is program, scaled to Milwaukee's size, based off of Portland's with those exemptions changing, so removing foreclosures as an exemption, changing the low-income qualification process to match Milwaukee's existing procedures, increasing the outreach, changing the days of compliance, and bringing that back to you guys for either another discussion or potential adoption.
And we will have more, I mean, I still want more analysis on, I mean, I was not, I don't have any analysis in front of me. You know, an email like that maybe you, I'm not sure when you received this email, but there was no analysis in the report.
Of the statutes? Yeah, I got it 2 days ago, so I'll make sure to send that to.
It would be, I mean, if they actually have a written legal opinion,
Then that would be very
it would be
helpful.
great to have. Yeah, let's ask
I
them
don't
if
want
they have
anybody
that.
to reinvent the wheel. I will plan to also do my own research, but if I don't have to do that, if someone has actually already really fully vetted all of those statutes that were listed there, and we haven't seen yet, then that's fine, but I still have a question about whether or not.
Great.
Could I also ask that we do a real basic, but take the average the average cost that a home is sold for in Milwaukee today, and look at what the seller is paying right now in terms of closing costs, title transfer fees, whatever there is, to get some perspective on how much $150 really matters in that whole long laundry list of.
I can ask about that. So actually, my husband works for mortgage closing, and so I've asked him a lot about this. And
Thank you,
he's
Joe.
becoming his own expert. Thank you, Joe. But so
To keep in mind, too, though, that this fee is paid ahead of time, upfront,
Right.
before you
It's
even put it
cash.
on the market.
but
Very, very.
it can be
other
included
fees.
in closing sales.
And there are
So
people that
there's
have to
nothing that.
decide whether that's,
Well, and what I'm asking is that we look also at not just closing costs, but there are inspections, there are other things that people
all
do
the things
ahead
you
of
have to do to
time.
get a house ready.
Often.
Yes.
So
aside from,
Oil tank thing.
you get the idea.
Yes, I'll do a quick, it'll be a little hard to break it down because that is so
Sure.
negotiable of who pays what, but I'll check to see if maybe we can get some average.
I'm hoping that there's something on the state website. I've looked at stuff, but it's all industry, just while we've been sitting here, so maybe something that's a little more objective would be useful.
Great.
if you're looking at
Don't
average, you got to
Go crazy trying to do
a
it.
couple of those $1 million homes that,
Yeah,
Right, yeah, maybe it's just,
Great.
a $300,000 house, that seems
Yeah.
like a safe bet.
that's pretty staple
It's
and
like 300.
average.
Yeah, it's 400 now.
It is 400 now.
Median's 400.
Probably a little more than that, yeah.
Great. Well, I know we went drastically over time.
Yeah, you did a bad
Thank
job.
you.
I even told Peter, I was like, we have 30 minutes. But thank you, and I'll make sure to send out that information about the
Thank
additional
you.
statutes that I got out.
appreciate it.
And we'll do some additional looking at the average cost to sell a home.
Yeah, since we don't have the presentation, can we have that list or just the slides?
Yeah,
Would be
absolutely,
Actually
yeah.
really helpful.
Yep.
Thanks.
You guys did great. This is a
Thank you.
complicated issue, and
Thank you,
sorry
thank
we
you.
made it take longer than it should
Better
have.
get it
It's all
right
right.
the first time.
Exactly, yes.
Have to worry about it.
Thanks, you guys.
All right, Festival Street closure protocols. Also a discussion, and this will be with our Community Development Director, Leila Mann, and our Assistant City Engineer, Jennifer Garbely.
Do you have updated pictures of the plaza?
I know.
noon, about 1 o'clock.
Today?
But I couldn't get very close. She gets a lot closer than I get.
Oh, you added fishies. I love it.
Thank you.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, look at there.
All right. So, we've been working really hard, and we're getting close to the point where we're gonna have our first event, November 21st, from 5:30 to 7:30. We're gonna shut the street down, and we're gonna have a grand opening.
Woohoo.
When?
November 21st, 5:30 to 7:30. So this started triggering. We need to start thinking about how do we close this street down? What kind of impacts are we going to have on the businesses, on staff time? What type of traffic control are we going to need? So we're starting to develop an application. I had that attached to your staff report. That's just a draft. We're still working on it. We got a second event, the annual Umbrella Parade, which we'll get to test out this closing of this facility. So, first of all, we got two types of closures that we're looking at. One is a full closure. That would be from Washington Street, down Main Street, then south of the plaza, right where that red line is, and there's a turnaround there. So that's what I would call a full closure. Then I'm proposing also the possibility of a partial closure. And the reason for that is it still provides access to the former Bloom parking lot, which is really important to think about because that parking lot is parking that Broken Arrow uses, that Bloom uses. I know Bloom's not there, but eventually someone else will be there, right? And so having that extra parking in that area is a big consideration due to the fact when we decide we're going to allow this street to be closed. Anything else on this side? I think we're pretty.
No, I would just reiterate, I think the idea of having a partial closure would allow use of the Adams Street connector and the plaza and connect to Dogwood Park while minimizing impacts on the surrounding businesses. So it gives the city flexibility to work with folks that are interested in using that space and not requiring us to shut the full street down. That was the logic behind that.
And I'm sorry, this is probably in the report, and I just am not calling it up, but is there some sort of criteria in mind for determining when a partial closure versus a full closure would be warranted?
It's more part of the application of what whoever's submitting would like to use for the space. It's not it's more of a checkbox if you're asking for a partial versus a full.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And I think that's, if I could add to it, that's partly what we wanted to talk about a little bit is just, the impact of doing a full street closure and how often we want to do that and that kind of thing. So this was something that Jennifer came up with that I thought was a really good compromise that allows us to still have access to businesses, but still allow for space for events and smaller events.
Great.
Yeah.
Just a quick, go back to that map.
Yeah.
The driveway into that parking lot.
You can't really see it at the moment because this is a proposed in the future if that parking lot was ever to be closed off and that there's two trees basically right by that blue line is the driveway.
Where the two trees are?
Yeah, they're not there now at this point.
Okay. But in this plan, the driveway is to the...
Left of the
north
blue
of
line.
the-
Yes, north of the blue line.
So why not do the closure right at the edge of the driveway?
That is the edge of the driveway. You still got to have access into the driveway is what I'm allowing.
The diagram's a little dated, I think, is the,
Doesn't really show it very
Yeah.
right.
So there's one tree that, yeah,
So the partial closure would allow entry.
Yes.
the partial closure would allow.
But we'll still maximize the closed area. That's
Yes.
the question I'm asking.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. That allows access to the driveway, and then it allows us to close the street down to the furthest extent to the south, which is where the bollards are located, just north of the turnaround.
Does it,
So we'd have to have 3 sets of bollards under, 3
No.
places to put bollards
Well,
under this.
We could
To
use,
attach
we could
bollards.
use a temporary device, barricade, to do a partial. If this became more of a permanent or more use of the facility, then I could add in another set of rows where I could place those bollards in that section as a possibility. At this point, I'm only putting them in for the full closure, right? Those are our bollards that we use within the actual plaza. And the idea is to move those bollards outside to be able to close the street down so you're not storing a bunch of bollards elsewhere. So.
And so on the parking lot, this is a little bit off topic, but there was talk about we're paving the parking lot. Is that happening?
paved.
It's already been repaved?
It's paved.
Oh, has it?
It hasn't been restriped yet, but that's just because it's curing.
And there was also a question about the
Easement.
the border of it, the size of it, and somebody wanting us to give up some of the Adam Street land to add to the parking lot or something? No. We didn't do
Well,
that.
yes. So the
Oh, yeah,
so
Brenna Key
the
brought that
concept
up.
was, so that parking lot was originally designed when there was an exit onto 21st.
Right.
So it was angled parking like this, right? Which is the width, given all of the rules around how long the parking spaces have to be and how wide the drive lane has to be, blah, blah, blah. That is all the room there is for. So right now, if they're going to go back in and restripe it legally, they have to restripe it that way, which makes it really hard for people to get back out. With, I think it was like 2 feet of, and it didn't even cause us to change the paving, it just allowed us to move the bumper stop, the wheel stop, to the edge of the pavement on the post office side. Just that was going to be enough to make it
So that it could be parallel,
parallel parking,
or I mean,
Right.
whatever.
perpendicular.
Perpendicular parking, so
Perpendicular.
that they could back out more easily. But that required, apparently, the jumping through of hoops with Denny et al.
The land use process, because the current parking lot, is it okay for me to add to that? The current parking lot, the way, they can go back and restripe it the way it previously was, which is the mayor is describing as a non-conforming use, but that's what it was before, so they're allowed to go back to that. We are currently evaluating a type 1 land use application for that site, so as mayor was also referencing, that there is an opportunity for them to restripe it differently, but our code does require it to come closer to conformance if they do so. So we actually today just responded to the applicant with some feedback to get them closer to conformance.
Who's the applicant?
Right now, it's actually the developers of Axle Tree, because they're working on potentially a shared parking arrangement for that site, which I think, as we know from our parking strategy, is an awesome idea, but that's a private deal that we're not engaged in, so I want to be really clear about that, and we're just looking at the application, and planning gave some really good feedback, and I feel like we have a good compromise, but we'll kind of see where that lands.
So in that type 1 application, would there be any potential usefulness in revisiting where the driveway is located? Because that driveway right now is kind of a mile wide. I don't know if restriping will reduce the need for it to be so wide and therefore maybe give us a different blue line location.
Well, the curb cut is already constructed.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's installed.
It's
Okay, never
installed.
mind.
We're done.
So
Yeah.
we're going to go with that for now.
I said nothing.
But it was, I mean, at least it used to be awfully wide. Is it narrower?
I
the
think
curb cut?
actually I narrowed it down a little bit, so, because there is a tree on the other side of that deal that's going in.
Great.
So,
I think
There's some cool
it's
aerial
like
photos
cars
you'll
can
see.
pass the driveway,
Yeah.
yeah,
which is probably what it was designed for.
correct. Yeah. Okay. All right, so at the moment, who are we going to allow to actually use this facility? At the moment, we're proposing city-sponsored events. And then we have the farmers market, CMI. Other is the one that's out there that we do need to discuss a little bit more because there's a lot of impacts in order to actually close this street down. This isn't your typical street. With farmers market, they're looking at, when are they looking at moving?
Well, so that conversation, and Dave's here, so I talked to him, and he said I could speak for him, but he's also good at speaking for himself. But one of the things we've been talking about with the market ongoing is that as long as the site across the street, the Harrison and Main site, is not being developed actively, that the city is amenable to the market staying in its current location, because that is their preference. And so that gives us time to get this thing built, understand kind of how it functions. There's also an interaction with the market and the development of the Coho Point project as well. So there'll be some impacts in terms of, so we all well know now from all the work that's been happening down in South Downtown with Axle Tree, that we will have to block off some parking spaces. So we want to be flexible so that we can work with the market and make sure that they move in a time and place that's comfortable for them. So my team will be in conversation with them as we advance the Harrison and Main site and as we get closer to understanding a construction start date for Coho Point at Caleb Creek.
Also, that looks real pretty.
It does. It looks great.
Yeah, we're getting there. So we have some logistics for safe closure. We want to make sure we've got the right type of barricade, signage, everything to close down this street. We also want to be careful on how much we're denying access to that private parking lot at the former Bloom area. We need to vet our permit and administrative issues in order to implement this closure. And then notification process. We got to notify businesses that we are closing that street down. And how many days, weeks, what do we give them? At the moment, I think I'm proposing 30 days in the application, and then they need to be notified at least 2 weeks prior to the event. I still need to go to the businesses and say, hey, is this reasonable? Is this going to work? Do you have any other suggestions? What would help to mitigate and make sure that we're not over abusing this site?
That doesn't seem long enough. When we allow people to close their own streets for block parties, I think that we require them to actually notify the neighbors before they even submit the application, right? Because they have to gather signatures, and that's at least 30 minutes, or 30 days. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. You got 30 minutes to object.
So
it seems like...
I actually took this from the block party application, started it. It actually had a 7-day notification of the neighbors, and it's more of it was a little bit different. You do have to notify the NDA. If you want to use...
But don't you have to actually get signatures?
No, you don't have to get written consent to shut it down on our application.
We made it really easy a couple of years ago when council wanted to have more of these.
Yeah, no, Portland requires signatures well before then.
Yeah, you have to get more than 50%
like,
of the homeowners on the street.
We don't require signatures at the moment.
So maybe...
We can.
No, I'm not suggesting making block parties harder. I'm just saying that, like, it seems like the street closure issue should, be relative to the impact, and so obviously it needs to be longer than 2 weeks. I can't imagine.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I would add to that too, because it's not a neighborhood street, it's an actual kind of...
It's a commercial street.
An essential connection street, so perhaps providing additional time to that gives us the opportunity then to notice the public at large, to say the street will be closed during this time as well. So those are some of the logistics that, as we were talking through, like how do we actually implement this, those things started coming up. So I think that's a notable point.
Are there times when we would have civic uses where we wouldn't know at least 30 days in advance that we needed to close the street? What are they?
Protest.
Gotcha.
Right. So this is a public space. So yes, absolutely. There are times when we literally, I think, we can place time and date restrictions on public protests. We can work with teams to make sure that we can function the city as we go through the protest and they're heard and seen. But that can show up within 12 hours. I mean, we have to respond in those cases. In general, though, when we're talking about how would we have events in under 30 days, definitely not city-sponsored events, and
Right.
CMI has
CMI
always
either.
been good about making sure we sort of see
Well, and
things
First
coming.
Friday, same
Yeah.
thing. We should be able to
Yeah.
schedule that. So the two things I want to enter into the conversation here while we're considering all of this. One is that during the original South Downtown process that we went through, the plan for this portion of this street was to be closed every weekend, all weekend, from whatever it was, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock on Friday night until Monday morning, or what. That was the plan, going back 15, 12 years ago, whenever that was. Also keep in mind that we no longer allow parking lots on our main street. So when this redevelops, that parking lot will go away.
And and I think to your first point, yeah, I've been a little concerned that the talk about this has shifted to talking about it a festival street as opposed to a plaza. It was envisioned to be lots of weeknight concerts, midweek farmers market maybe, lots of closures, like closure a lot in the nice part of the year. And yeah, the full weekend closure. So
Seems to suggest, I don't know, but does that require the full street closure every time? Because it seems like maybe we're talking about the partial closure more than we are the full
Well, so
closure. So I want to
right
maybe
now,
think more.
we're worried about that parking lot, and I get that. But it will redevelop, I suspect.
Not just the parking lot,
It's not
even the
just the
driveway
parking
that's
lot.
across the street to what's now our, the one that we're co-developed, the Coho.
They will not have
Also
access
impacts.
on.
They won't
It's
have,
going to be
No.
any.
there.
Okay.
I moved that.
I see, okay.
They will
found a
have access.
compromise.
They will have access off of Washington.
Talking about,
Okay.
I'm confused.
Now there's
So-
access on Washington. I'm
We're
not up to
talking about
speed on Coho.
the Coho development. We have moved it off of the Adams Street connector.
Right.
Actor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew that.
But you also, I'm just a little sympathetic because of, the businesses, the post office. That post office gets used a lot.
Oh, yeah.
There is
still
a lot
today.
of people in and out.
Well, there's still going to be that turnaround.
Yeah, we're still going to have the drop-off.
Yeah, but
You'll
they
have a drop-off, but you won't have any parking.
Yeah.
You will not have any parking if you do a full closure, because that drop-off is just a turnaround spot.
But
That's
it's no
not a
parking.
parking. There's no parking south of that option.
And there are a
So
lot of
something-
people who have boxes,
they go
and they're elderly,
7
and they
days
have limited mobility.
Yes.
And I know that
gotta watch
Broken
out for
Arrow
us.
draws a lot of business from all over the region because people come to use the archery range there aren't that many archery ranges indoor.
Their
metro
largest,
area.
their days, their busiest time is Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
And
Sure it is.
I'm just, so just be aware. Just be aware of
Yeah.
what we're doing here.
Sunday, like, people just checking their mail. You're talking about the post
No,
office.
the archery.
Archery. Oh, they're open on Sundays?
Yeah, their
So
biggest
even-
days for Saturday and Sunday.
Even though that parking lot goes away eventually when the Bloom building, they're still going to need some kind of an entrance if they build underground parking like Axle Tree did.
Correct.
So they're still going to have a driveway at some point that we're going to have to conflict with.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
they're probably not getting one on Washington since there is already one right next door.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just the way the site's configured, there's no other access point if that site moves. But I think just to the point of what we're offering, and this is good discussions why we're here, is that we're really thinking about all the businesses along that street and just maintaining access to them. And then the eventual redevelopment of that site will likely include some amount of parking. And then the only access point will be from Main Street. So we're just thinking ahead, trying to anticipate all of those needs and trying to find a way to balance multiple objectives as well. And I think too, just based on my understanding of the series of plans, this plan's evolved over time as we've gotten a little bit more tighter. And I think that the original plan, when the street was to be blocked off entirely, was actually closing the street. So I think that the plan has evolved. We've tried to utilize the space that we have to the greatest extent we can, and now we're just trying to figure out how to balance all the multiple needs that we expect to happen here. So
and
appreciate all the comments.
The first year that it's open, when we're doing basically just city events will give us a good indication and help us determine what kind of requests are we getting and how else might it be used and what are we, what do we need to massage and that. It's a good test ground.
The other aspect I want to bring up is just the undercrossing is, everybody loves it. And when we open that up, they are like, yes, we're going to be able to go a through road. And so that access from all the residents from coming from Lake, like they're going to want to use that again.
They want to drive their RVs under it.
5-minute light on.
Which I'm working on. Right. I'm working on the 5-minute light. It's actually a 15-minute light. I'm working on it. We're going to work on that.
She gets things done too.
The other day.
So I didn't get to complete my thought, which is that because we started talking about something else that's really important, but the point that I wanted to get to was that I want to maybe be thinking about the permanent bollards sooner than later for the partial closure, because it sounds to me like we're going to have lots of opportunity, and there at least initially it was conceived to have lots of closures, and I wonder if I don't like the temporary, I don't like barricades, especially for something that has been designed to be a closed. I really like the idea of having permanent bollards that protect people who are there, and especially since it is such an important connection.
So what would be the disadvantage of just putting in bollard?
Well, there's money, right?
There's money. It's more about
Storage.
my contract's already moving forward. In the contract is to put in a space for the bollards in the 2 locations that we have. So it's adding another one. I might not be able to do it with this contract, but we may be able to, within the year. I think that's something we can look at. So I will look at it. I'll see where I am at with budget. If I have the ability to put it in and we have time in order to get the pieces that we need additional bases. We've already ordered the bollards. We've already ordered all the pieces we need to do everything that I've talked about so far. So this would be an additional order to get those extra, basically probably about 4 more bases, maybe a little more. It's wider in that section that I'm closing it off. So I just need to a little bit look at it. I hear you. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, it just seems like if we're closing it more often for partial, then that's...
And that's, I don't know, are we?
I don't know.
So I think, if we want to look at it for this year, and if we are, then let's install it then, So I hear you. So also we got a little cost recovery if we are to open this up to that other group. We're going to have staff time, we're going to have trash service, we're going to have water, we have electricity now. If it's just a random person that's doing a special event, they're not going to know how to close the street down, so it's going to require our staff to be out there for that event. And, if it's weekend time, that's double time, possibly. So, or time and a half, or callback. So it's just something to think about moving forward on who we're going to allow to actually use this space.
Oh, I absolutely think we should recover costs for the staff time, because that is the big piece up there. The electricity is probably minimal, and the water's probably minimal. The trash may be a bigger piece.
But it's also showing them how to connect to those, right? It's showing them how to use those, where those boxes are. They're not going to know where those facilities are, so I need someone to train whoever's going to be out there to, be able to use those features of this facility.
Right. Yeah, we should absolutely recover those costs.
And what events do we imagine that the city has zero involvement with?
If the city has what?
Zero involvement with?
Jason had a ton of them, and I can't remember them now.
On Main Street?
What?
I can name a number of them if you'd like me to.
And what might come with this asset. I mean, you could host, it actually becomes a lot more attractive than the Milwaukee Bay Park, because then you don't have to deal with the conflicts with 99E.
Right.
Yeah.
So it becomes
still
a
get to
pretty
look at the
attractive
different
venue if you want to throw like a small, beer, like a craft brew festival, or, because you've got the park there, it's got access
An
to
art fair.
transit,
Anything.
Runs, fun runs, things like that.
Yeah.
Because everything that's out of, the parking lot across the street is going to need a new home. And so there's a lot of events that aren't necessarily city-run that come out of there.
Yeah.
So is this a new spot that they are available to use, or are we pushing them to the park? Which is not also a bad thing either, but that'll be under construction at some point.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a got a few questions I want to get through really quickly, or try to get through really quickly. Is council supportive of the staff recommendations to test the usage of the facility with city events for this next year? Kind of that's where we
Meaning
want to
saying
focus.
nobody can apply. We're not taking applications for any other events.
Quite possibly.
But people are, if somebody really attractive comes and.
And we got plenty of time
We're going to hear from
organize
you
it.
again, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we're going to end up making a deal.
I'll give you $1 million.
So
Sold. We want to dance
Our
on
pla-
those fish.
our plan is to come back in January and talk about the 2 events that are coming up and how they went and what did we find out and what do we want to recommend. So at that point in January, we can rediscuss,
Yeah.
what else we want to think and what items we find are kind of impactful. So.
Cool.
Are there other issues that council thinks staff should consider or address that have not been mentioned?
We've mentioned a lot.
Can't think of anything.
I guess just what's the plan for Dogwood Park planning and, an interim? Dogwood Park is a weedy mess at the moment, yeah. I mean, what's the plan for maintaining Dogwood Park and for the master planning of it?
Yeah, I think that I actually handed that scope of work over to Kelly Brooks, and she's working with a landscape architect who is also the same landscape architect that's doing a lot of the work for the Coho project, so to kind of bring all of the multiple needs around that site. So that's moving forward now, and I believe early next year we'll have a framework plan for that in place. But I think that's part of why we want to kind of test out what this means, because I think if you do a partial or a full street closure, it's probably also going to include an element of Dogwood Park. And so I think as staff thinks through it, we need to kind of look at it not just as the street and how do we get the bollards in place and the electricity, but it's like, how does this whole area function? So we're cognizant of that. And I guess the answer to your question is, Councilor Beatty, we don't know yet, but we're thinking through it.
But my plan is also, I have a phase 2. We still have vertical elements we want to tie in, and so we want to tie that in with Dogwood Park, the vertical elements, and, if Adam Street, right? Make this a whole kind of connection. So that's all something we're considering.
And the vertical parts, are those including potential shade structures?
Yes.
Footings have been installed already, so it's not, we don't have to redo any structural aspect of it. It's a matter of pulling 4 panels where the structures would go, and then redeveloping with that vertical element and then repouring up against that. So it has been planned for, we're getting there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What are the council's expectation for public, I think we've talked about this for public use for the events. It sounds like we'll recircle back on this question a little bit more after we've tested it out. But I've heard you as far as what was the intention of it earlier on and what that means. So a couple pictures. There's a couple aerials, some drone pictures. Pretty exciting.
Drone now?
No, the contractor brought a drone and took it. I'm working on it, but don't have it yet. I am working on it. So anyways, first fish was poured Saturday, second fish was poured on Monday. They've got a lot of cleanup work to still do. And then the 2 sides, we're probably looking at next week as long as weather cooperates.
Cool.
And then just really quick, Kronberg got poured today. The Long Bridge got poured. So it's looking really great. It was beautiful. I got to stop by and see it.
But don't walk on it.
Don't walk on it. And I'm getting a sign. I'll get a sign up.
Till January.
January.
That's a long time.
That is a long time.
Don't you touch it. You don't put your name in it.
And the reason you shouldn't
If I do
walk on
Mark's
it.
and he does mine.
Is because you could ruin it, and we would have
Right.
problems and complications with the bridge
Yeah.
long-term.
It
So
is,
please do not.
yes, it is not just safety, it actually compromises the integrity of the structure and will
gosh,
break our $2 million bridge, so do not walk on
Right.
it.
Do not try to get funny with it.
No.
No.
Mayor.
No artwork on the bridge.
Wow.
I thought you were directing that to Island Station.
Goes out to all the residents.
Anyways, I just had to share that. I'm pretty excited. So everything's coming together.
Cool.
It'll be finished before the end of the year.
And it being Sodo, and Jen, I just have to say, give a massive shout out to Jen, because we kind of conceptualized this idea, and then Jen has really carried it out and has just been tremendous, thinking about the businesses too, and engaging with the businesses, which hasn't always been easy, frankly. But I just want to give a shout out to Jen for really carrying this thing forward and getting it constructed. So
When you've
well
obviously had a busy week.
Yeah.
it's par for the course at this point for us, I think.
Wow.
It's awesome.
Any other questions?
It's awesome.
All right.
I'm super excited.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District Advisory Board discussion, which will be led by our very own Julie Price.
Yeah, just want to fill you guys in on, I think you know that the District Advisory Board of the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, in other words, the DAB of the NCPRD, of which I serve as the council representative, has been on hiatus for the last couple of years because of the work that NCPRD and the City of Happy Valley have been doing on should they be in the district or out of the district, whatever. At the current time, they are in the district, and the Board of County Commissioners, who is the ultimate board for this advisory board, has asked that the DAB be reconstituted in its current form to specifically look at the bylaws and determine what the actual composition going forward should be. The reason for that is that there is a general feeling, general thought that the unincorporated areas of, like Jennings Lodge, Oak Grove, Oak Lodge, are underrepresented, especially when you consider the number of residents that are in that particular area. So the district includes all of that unincorporated area, the city of Milwaukee and its UGMA, which is also, of course, unincorporated, and the city of Happy Valley and its UGMA on the east side of Highway 205. So they reconstituted that with our 9-member board of directors, and it's an advisory board, so keeping that in mind, whatever decisions we come up with get sent then to the Board of County Commissioners sitting as the district board in that case to make the final decision on that. So the composition as it is right now is one representative from each city, and the cities both have chosen to have that be a city council person. Usually it has been, but there have been some points in time when it hasn't been. Lynn Sharp, for instance, was the city of Milwaukee's representative for a while. She was then followed by Councilor Mike Miller, who was the rep until he left the council. So that's 2 people, and then 1 person from representing the Milwaukee Center, because that is the only community center that is a bona fide community center that actually has a board of directors. And those members of the board of directors come from all throughout the district. And our city appoints one of those people to the board of directors, and I believe it's currently a 9-member board of directors. So there's a representative from the Milwaukee Center. There are then representatives from both the east and west side of 205 who could be located, who could be residents of the city on each side of the highway or not. It's ambiguous. And then there's 1 each from each side of 205 in the unincorporated area. And then additionally, there's 2 from unincorporated anywhere. So that's 9 people currently on the board. We've been asking, originally the ask was for there to be a position on there for someone from our Parks and Recreation Board and also from Happy Valley's Parks and Recreation Board. That's morphed a little bit, but just also as a kind of side note to that, there were 3 people just recently appointed to the District Advisory Board to fill vacancies, 3 of them on this side of the highway. 2 of them live in the unincorporated area, and 1 of them lives in the city of Milwaukee and also sits on the Parks and Recreation Board. So that person is filling that one position. The meetings have been extremely interesting. There's a wide diversity of opinion on how the composition of the board should ultimately be settled. So we're using facilitators, conflict resolution facilitators from Clackamas County are actually facilitating the discussions at the District Advisory Board meetings. And at the last meeting, we got quite a ways through selecting, not necessarily voting, but selecting in our own personal opinions what would be the best composition for the board. We had choices we could make on different things, and the ones that had the most people selecting them, I'll put it that way because I don't want to use the word votes because it was made clear we're not voting yet, out of the 9 of us, there were 6 who said that each city should still have an elected person. It doesn't currently say that in the bylaws. It just said the city will appoint 1 person. And like I said, generally that's been an elected person. It's a city council person. And so there were 6 who said yes, continue that, 3 who said no. And the other things, there were a couple of things that were for sure, yeah, like move forward with that, unincorporated areas, that type of thing. When it came to the Milwaukee Center, there was some discussion about the options were Milwaukee Center, yes, we said, yeah, there should be somebody from that, but there was also, well, what if there then are other community centers, actual full-blown community centers, and they have board of directors? Well, let's give that some consideration. Maybe there would be 1 group and 1 person would come from that or whatever. Nothing's decided at this point. So that's one of the questions on the table is how to address that. The other question on the table is, so should there be a city-appointed person that the city of Milwaukee, other than a city councilor, and the city of Happy Valley could appoint to the board? Right now, other than the Milwaukee Center and the 2 city council people, everyone is vetted, and the Board of County Commissioners, sitting as the district board, appoints those people. The third one is the adding of 2 people from the unincorporated, perhaps anywhere in the unincorporated, or perhaps it could be geographically located in Jennings Lodge, Oak Grove, Oak Lodge area, adding 2 people and making the board then an 11-member board. So those are the major things that we've been dealing with. Like I said, we're facilitated meetings. We've got 9 on there now. We're meeting monthly to determine that, and I'm open for any questions, and hopefully I could answer them.
So just a clarifying question on the 2 other community centers, so that's Concord, I take it, and
But
Wichita.
they're not yet community
And they're not
centers.
yet, and that's my question is,
Yeah.
as I understand it, neither one is within a couple years at best of being up and running as a community center, and probably 4 or 5 years, right?
Correct.
So is the discussion like, we'll revisit that when they are community centers, or?
That's been part of it. In doing this selection process, personally, I felt like there wasn't a lot of opportunity within that to have discussion about what each one of those really means. They were trying to get through as many of those choices as possible so that we could then look at it at the next meeting and refine those down. And that's when I would expect that there would be a lot more discussion, in each of those areas perhaps, but especially in that one. Yeah. There was also, so our choices were, yes, they're on the board and they vote, or they serve as a liaison and they don't vote. And the 3 that felt that there should not be a city councilor on voting, suggested that they be ex officio and not able to vote. But it was an 8-to-1 vote that the Board of County Commissioners would be a liaison, non-voting person, not a voting person, because that's who, all of the discussion goes back to, all the recommendations.
Why would they even be?
They vote,
Yeah.
right. And I don't believe they sit as a voting member in any of the other groups other than C4 and C4 subcommittee, which is a different kind of animal anyhow. And then the third column where we could put some of these groups was they could be a selection criteria, and so that's where things like some of the geographic differences, the ethnicity differences, the age differences. They had, for instance, youth, they had senior citizen, that type of thing. And almost everybody put all of those kinds of groups of people and geographic groups into those are the kinds of things you should look for in doing this selection, doing the interviews and the selection process. And then the last column that we were working with was just discard that. And so, like in those different groups, a lot of those just went into the discard, like it should be somebody from, in my discard, for instance, was, somebody from CPOs, somebody from some other elected group in the unincorporated area. So like what, the water group, the water board, that kind of thing, because those are the only other, elected. So our goal, really seriously, our goal had been to complete the composition part of the change of bylaws at the last meeting, but we did not have the opportunity to do that. So we're certainly hoping, I think the majority of us are, that we can get through it at the next meeting. The chair of the Board of County Commissioners has said he wants it done by December, and he has also said at this meeting last week, or week before last, that if it wasn't done timely, that the Board of County Commissioners would just do it for us. And so it's incumbent upon us to work together to arrive at a decision that works for the entire district and not just for the fiefdoms within the district. So.
Well, that's not solely the responsibility of Milwaukee or Happy Valley.
So help me understand what you're saying.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
I'm just saying that collaboration is not solely upon the shoulders of Milwaukee.
Absolutely true. It's incumbent upon everyone who's sitting in that room to work with each other and to make sure that whatever decision we come up with, for instance, the decision on having elected members from the city on the district advisory board, but not having an elected member of the Board of County Commissioners, I mean, that if it stays like it is, that seems like a decision that will move forward. Even those who don't vote for that still need to support that and work with the rest of us to make the rest of the board happen. I don't personally disagree that there is a need for a stronger voice in the unincorporated area, but what I took time at the last meeting to remind people of is that it was the city of Milwaukee working with the Clackamas County Parks District, and people from Clackamas County at that time to actually form this North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, and so that we could all be better served. And then years later, Happy Valley came into it, but it was that, and at that time, Milwaukee owned most of the parks we own today. We've added a couple since then, but we owned our parks. The city of Milwaukee, I believe, was very forward-thinking and forward-looking in saying we want to have parks and green spaces. They are important to our community. And we didn't have anything to do with up until the formation of the District Advisory Board and the district itself, we didn't have anything to do with whether Happy Valley had parks or whether their UGMA had parks or whether the unincorporated area had parks. That was up to their leaders, their jurisdiction, and that didn't occur. But, I sometimes feel that we're almost being penalized or ready to be penalized or being ostracized or whatever because we were, in fact, forward-thinking and that we own our parks and that and I believe that it's important for us as the landlord to be sitting at the table where decisions are being made. But also, during the years when the DAB was meeting and things were working, there did not seem to be, to people sitting there, and I've talked to some of the former ones that had sat on that group, both the unincorporated and the city people, people weren't like protecting their own little area or advocating for their own little area and not advocating for the entire district. We looked at the capital improvement program for the district, the SDCs for the district, in which we haven't finished. We were like 3/4 of the way through. Now we've got to start all over again on that. So we've got really important work of the district that I'm hoping we can get to very, very soon once we get these issues about the district board composition finalized.
So how can we help? What are the specific things you need from us?
Right now, just awareness, and if a point in time comes when we need to do something else, if we need to advocate somewhere or go to the Board of County Commissioners and advocate or, whatever, than that. If folks hear about things that are concerning the people that live within the district, I'd like to know about it because I'd like to know what the constituents are feeling and thinking and where they think that inroads can be made to help serve everyone.
So I guess my concern about what you've described is if Happy Valley leaves, which I think there's, as far as everything I've heard, they'll still be trying to leave.
We're in fact going to do 2 sets of bylaws, one with them in and one with
them out. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if they leave, it really becomes, the way it's shaping up, very heavy on unincorporated. And we're the only city, and we have 2 slots out of, or, if you think of the Milwaukee Center as ours, but it's not really necessarily ours.
Not even for sure.
I don't think you count the Milwaukee Center as one of our slots.
No, absolutely.
Right. That is absolutely a regional asset.
It's been made very clear at these meetings that the Milwaukee Center is, just because the person representing them right now lives in the city of Milwaukee, that's not been the case over the last many years, and that they aren't there just to have a Milwaukee vote. Right. It's been suggested that that's the situation, but that is not the situation. But so they also, at a couple of meetings ago, the NCPRD showed us maps of the population, and what was interesting to me is that each of the cities and their UGMA are about roughly 55,000. The unincorporated area that's not in UGMAs is also about 55 to 58,000.
All the rest of the unincorporated, right? That's not in one of our 2 UGMAs.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So there's also on that selection, should there be a representative from each of the UGMAs, and that's still in play also.
And so you say there is now.
There
could be.
There is. It's unincorporated, and the could is unincorporated. It's
East of 205.
East or west.
Yeah.
In this case, the caveat to it is could be from a city on either side. So Ben Johnson is filling that position. So, because he lives in the city, he wouldn't have been able to fulfill one of the other positions.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting my head around.
You know,
I know.
we
Well,
need
I have
a
trouble
diagram.
getting
We need
my
a
head around it,
diagram,
and I sit
yeah.
there. So, but much more to come, much more to come. I've been doing a lot of research and reading, and thanks to Scott, reading back to 1990 when the city of Milwaukee and Clackamas County spent almost a full year in determining what this new district might look like and how it might function, and, one thing and another. And they were extremely strong, good partnerships, and I want to make sure that, that's maintained throughout this. So,
All right, well, it's 5:39.
yeah.
Council meeting in
20 minutes.
very shortly. So I'm going to close this work session, and we will be back here in 19 minutes-ish.